All right. Well, good morning. I think we've got some slides here. That's great. So, what a great story. You know, this last year I've spent a fair amount of time with the folks at Trace3, and you know they do an amazing job of helping bring corporate innovation to a best practice to their corporate customers. And I've just been thrilled to work with the team. And this is something that I've been passionate about for a number of years, and it's just been a thrill to partner with Trace3. In fact, this is my first Evolve, and I thought we might just want to give a big shout out for what an amazing event. I mean, from selfies with Magic Johnson and some extreme ownership with Jocko, and just great content today. I thought we'd just give an applause. I mean, you guys are doing an amazing job. You know, we're at a time where innovation is taking hold in so many areas. I mean, it's almost too daunting to even comprehend. What I want to do is share a little bit of our perspective. First, introduce Mayfield. We are an early stage venture capital firm, which means we invest in Series A companies. We've been around 50 years, and in fact, this year we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. So we're one of the very early venture firms. We have what we call a people-first investing thesis. The thesis means we look for the innovator that wants to change the world, who has a passion and a big idea, and often doesn't have all the resources, not just capital, but the process to actually build an amazing company. And so we put our resources around the company. So from Atari to our recent IPO with Lyft, we've got 18 funds, more than 500 companies, literally hundreds of amazing innovators and entrepreneurs that we get to spend time with. And one of the things that I want to do here now is sort of break down this what I think is the must-have skill in a corporate environment. So if we were to weightlift, if you will, the new must-have skill is, are we good at innovating? Are we better than our next in class? Are we better than our competition? Are we better than yesterday? And so what I want to do is break it down by first sharing a little bit about where venture capital is, just as an industry, where we're putting our money, where the money's coming from to some extent, and then some corporate innovation best practices and maybe a little bit of a takeaway for you to benchmark yourself against how you're doing. So venture capital, lots of money goes into venture capital. And in fact, this chart shows this last year, 2018, was an amazing milestone year. More money went into venture capital than ever before, $132 billion, over 9,500 companies. Why so much money? Monetary policy drives some of it. Venture capital has traditionally performed at about 3 times the S&P. So if you're chasing yield, you're a large endowment, pension fund, et cetera, venture capital is a great asset class for you to get returns from. But more importantly, what we're seeing is corporate venture teams, sovereign wealth, and other major investors are diving in as well. We're seeing investment rounds in the 100 million plus as a norm. It used to be very irregular. We would see a 100 million round at a Series C or D level. Now it's a day-to-day occurrence. So where's the money going? Interestingly, the money continues to flow into California. What this chart shows that in last year, between the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, combined, more than 50% of all the dollars in deal flow are flowing into this area. So if you want to find innovative ideas, that's likely where they are. This doesn't mean it's not happening elsewhere. There's incubators and angel funding happening all around the globe. It's a global event. We do have a dominant position in the Bay Area that continues, though. So what are some of the technology trends that we're looking at? And there's many, and I can't get into all of them, but there's a couple here that I want to dive into. The first one is really around this transformation of the legacy environment that we've all built over the last 20 or so years. We're now moving to this cloud-first, cloud-native world. This is really changing the way we design, of course. We've got now this scalable architecture, many containers at scale, even in the thousands, if you will, to provide this loosely coupled architecture and infrastructure. It's a skill set that operational teams at the ops level, at the development team, at the DevOps level are actually trying to be as best in class at. Now the next generation, now that we apply automation to this, we're seeing with 5G and IoT devices that the cloud is moving all the way to the edge. We've got mission-critical applications in a car, in a smart building, in a smart house. How do you have infrastructure at that layer? Thinking like a venture firm, we think of this as a huge opportunity. We're essentially remaking the entire IT stack, from the DevOps layer the cybersecurity, the infrastructure to manage it and orchestrate it. All those layers are opportunities for investments. A couple examples, one that you'll hear from in a few minutes, Portworx, Volterra, and HashiCorp, two other amazing companies really banging up this space. Another area that often gets talked about, or we had a lot of press about, was sort of this whole Bitcoin area. So I think we're over, to some extent, the whole gold mining era of Bitcoin. But underneath that, of course, there's this infrastructure known as blockchain. And this is really the even further decentralization of an IT strategy. If we take it all the way to this environment, leveraging blockchain, where we can truly decentralize with unlimited scale, no single point of failure, this secure and immutable environment is really a fascinating architecture for applications. If we were to rethink the application designs with this sort of theorem, we would have a whole new class of applications. We talk about simple contracts that are actually able to adjudicate themselves automatically. This sort of decentralized environment, I think, is the remake of a lot of applications, a lot of the software industry that we now know today. We're at the beginning of the process. There's a couple interesting examples, Storj doing decentralized tokenized storage, and Alchemy essentially providing blockchain as a service, a fascinating company. Another area, and of course we can't miss this one, we've talked about it here for the day and a half, is AI and machine learning. There's an optic here that I want to provide since we've talked a lot about it, and I think what's happening is we're moving from the last 10 years of installing our systems of record, that are these record-keeping systems, to systems of action and systems of intelligence with really me, the user, in mind. And if we put the optic on the user, which is, can you help me do this job smarter, faster? I'm today spending too much time in mundane tasks. You're asking me again, can you just improve it? You've got the data, make it possible for me. So we see this predictive use case, the idea of employing all the data, algorithms, in a way to mine new insight is really where the new gold, the new oil, so to speak, comes from. All kinds of companies. One that you'll hear from in a bit is Big Panda on the operations side. Another one that I didn't list here on the sales side is Outreach, providing a way for sales teams to be really thoughtful about who do I call next. And anyway, there's hundreds of companies. Balbix you'll also hear from as well. But this for us is key thesis to investing. We look for investment opportunities that apply a machine-learned, data-driven, algorithmic science to every piece of their business as a way to improve its operation. Constantly learning and constantly improving. Another area that's, to me, even more world-changing is the idea that only a few years ago, the mapping of a genome would have cost in the millions. Human genome mapping was almost $10 million about 6 years ago. Today, it's sub-$1,000. Add to that the computing capacity that can actually break that data down and do the analytics on it. We're at the renaissance of a whole new market. Essentially, we believe as investors that there will be the creation of all sorts of new design of product, both for human diagnostics, therapies, human longevity, new food products, everything from, I think we heard about beer yesterday, to all sorts of new designs. We go to these events around synthetic biology where the creation of new products, materials, how buildings will be created based upon the ability to break down the biology in a meaningful way. CRISPR, the tool set that allows you to actually edit and place DNA and RNA into an active environment, just fascinating. This is perhaps the world changing. This is how our children's children will live to 120 or 50 years old. God help us, right? So what's the problem? I meet with a lot of teams together with Trace3, and over the course of the year, we'll have many CIOs and innovation groups come meet with us, and they're eager for innovation, but they often argue that while they're eager for innovation, they're full of business process and complex process, and they're large organizations, so they're the managers on the left. Meanwhile, on the right are these young startups, and they're not all from the Silicon Valley show, of course, but they're young and they're disruptive and they have a mission. They want to change the world. How do you bring these two together? And I sort of draw this picture as what I call the impedance mismatch. They don't really work together. They're very different. And so how do you break that down? There's a number of examples, and I try to extract examples from companies that have interesting approaches to leveraging innovation. I spent some time with Andy Jassy's team recently, who has built, of course, an amazing platform, AWS, et cetera. What they've been doing, though, is at the core, learning how to innovate as a skill set. And you've probably all heard of the two-pizza team idea, but there's a couple takeaways that I think are notable. One is this concept of a small team who are accountable for the objective. Second, that they really bring the passion of their customer as their core driver. What can we do to be better and better all the time? They constantly A/B test this thing. They test, measure, kill, or keep moving as a skill set. They have to report on this skill set, this outcome, this A/B testing, if you will, to their management as a process. So there's multiple small teams, actually dozens and dozens of them, working on tangible use cases across the organization. They must deliver results. They must continuously learn. Another example is a large corporate organization I've gotten to know really well, and this bullseye on the right just speaks volumes to me of the idea that they understand it's about many ideas. They have to continue to inspire themselves to think differently. They know they're in a narrow box at times. They know their processes that they've built over many years can sometimes be so hardening that they forget that there's other things happening outside of them. So best practice for them, they pick 4 topics every year. They then have an innovation scout team that sources ideas at scale. This last year, they sourced 700 ideas. They move into active discussions with 150. They do 25 completed POCs with them, and they licensed 7. The idea there is they're built for scale, and they understand that whole ideation and the ability to really think bigger requires that they force themselves to get out of their own language, their own process at some level. Okay, so there's so much about corporate innovation. You think, well, somebody should have written a book. Well, indeed somebody did. So I've gotten to know this guy, Matthew Lemurl. He's the chairman of the Keiretsu Fund, which is an angel investing organization. It's a very simple read, and I'll give you the synopsis here. I'm not sure I'm helping him sell books, but so he basically said, look, there's a bunch of major tech companies. What could we learn from them if we're all eager to continuously innovate here and get better at it? So he said, I'm going to go meet with a team at Alphabet or Google and Amazon and Apple and Facebook and Microsoft and see if I can extract and assimilate into a tangible read material what they do differently or what they do as best in class. And this little picture here starts with the top, which is the corporate executive leadership team provides enough oxygen for innovation. And they do so in a couple ways. One, they set the message that innovation is important to the company. 2, they give definitive areas of focus. Let's not do everything. Let's focus on the following key areas. And they set the stage of continuously bringing innovation into the conversation. And they use this customer thesis, and this I think is an axiom that continues to present. The customer obsession is part of it. The next is, okay, so now senior leadership board kicks off the big topic. How do you keep this going? We've got weekly staff meetings. We've got offsite meetings. Are we bringing that conversation in every time? This is a core skill set that each of these organizations do well, and that is monthly, weekly. They're ongoingly challenging themselves, if you will, to keep the innovation, the disruption, the appetite for risk, the think bigger, the be more passionate about our customer conversation as purposeful in every dialogue. And then they align these to these key attributes that they've been given. So the next area is, how do you make this culture around innovation, this risk appetite, actually happen? Most organizations don't give bonuses for failure. We don't give bonuses for learning success from failure. So how do you bring this sort of culture of innovation in? And again, the key driver that I'm seeing here is this obsession with the customer. The customer told me this. I just went on a customer meeting. Each of you goes out on, let's say, sales calls that debrief from what you learn from those customer experiences, insight into how to improve your business, your process, and how to be more purposeful with that customer environment. So that obsession becomes this ongoing training, if you will. And this generates the whole organization to want to participate in this obsessive customer behavior. So that's a skill set around culture. And then the last is really exploiting outside ideas. And often I see large organizations spend almost the same on internal R&D as they do on external R&D, or even more so. And it isn't that internal R&D is wrong, but is it self-limiting in its perspective? And do we have these ivory tower teams that aren't looking outside? So one of the core things that Matthew extracted was these teams are very aggressively looking outside. Mentioned before, hackathons and things like this as vehicles to get new ideas, really crack outside of your organization, certainly even outside of your industry for new ideas. You know, I met with some healthcare companies recently who said, why don't we talk to some consumer companies that are selling in an e-marketplace just so you can learn how differently they think about customer engagement, how differently they think about encouraging customers to have a dialogue with them. And it was a way for them to think almost orthogonally to how they consistently have thought about their business. So I've broken this down into what I call the 3 I's of corporate innovation. And I wrote this on the back of a napkin one day. I was sitting in a meeting. I thought, you know, what if we just summarize this down? I'm so sick of this word innovation. Can we just pick another word? And I thought, well, let's use these other words. And so these are what I call the 3 I's of corporate innovation. And some of this is a repeat, but basically, these are sort of the challenges perhaps to ask yourself, are we doing these? Are we doing these well? The ideation process, we talked about this, it's top-down, external, as a volume effort. Incubation is the one that always breaks down. This is where we'll make introductions as a venture firm. You'll have met people in various events, and you try to apply the same process for your traditional vendors that you might do with a startup. There's significant failure in that process. That's typically where I see startups fail. So unique process, shepherded, it actually brings finance, procurement, legal, et cetera, into the game to say, hey, we're going to look at 700 companies in the course of the next year. They're different. We're going to do an MVP around a use case. It's going to be a 60, 90-day window. We're going to do this in a way where we can sprint through these things and learn ideas, and do so in a way that brings new process as a team to the organization. This concept of accepting failure, and I think we've heard it before, accepting this as a learning process, I think is critical as well. How do you actually measure, you as managers, you as leaders, actually promote failure? Obviously, we don't want to promote failure, but we sure want to learn from external opportunities and apply them, and then learn in our attempt to bring them in. A/B testing is a good axiom to do that. We tried this and tried this. This one worked better than this one. Here's the data against it. So we're killing the A, we're going with B. That's a failure risk opportunity in best practice. And then the last is the investment phase. Sometimes we'll introduce early stage companies that are very early, and in fact, they're even fundraising. And you might meet them at a stage, you go, hey, I'd love to put some money in. You know what they really need, though, is your insight. The early stage companies are running fast. They have an expertise around building a product and a design of a product, but they might not have that deep domain insight, back to this impedance mismatch that we talked about a few minutes ago, where you're this process-orientated big organization. That depth of process is real insight. There's nuggets there. If you can become a co-development partner in the early stage of your relationship with a startup, you will see them move their R&D path in a way that's very purposeful to your requirements, and in fact, they'll be a richer company because of it. So this sort of co-development as a first phase, I think, is a first best practice to deploy. Okay, so how about a test? This is the idea of writing something down. You got these beautiful pens in front of you from Trace3, or at least they did yesterday. So this is a way maybe to challenge yourself, score yourself. So on the ideation concept, how do you think you score? If on a scale of 1 to 3, How many startups did you look at this last year? And of course, your mileage may vary, but we're just going to use this as a way to exemplify the idea. The second is, what's your ability to actually scale through the testing of these? Are you getting better at it? Are you faster at it? Can you actually look, come to conclusion, get done with it, kill it, and move on? Or are you stuck in many POCs where they're sort of dripping on and they don't really have a conclusion or an advocate any longer? Active POCs that are brought to conclusion, that have a next step, et cetera, I think is the next test. And then the investment side, I put a position here of whether or not you have a budget for innovation. Is it important enough for your company to invest in this as a process? Put people, process, ownership, and money to investing in innovation. And then the last one, how about you? Are you measured on it? This is always the breakdown. Hey, it's not my job. I don't get measured for that. I get measured for bringing the revenue in and not breaking things. So I'm going to leave with the last, some thank yous here, what I call the eyes of innovation. So we talked about innovate, we talked about ideate, we talked about incubate, we talked about invest. Thank you. We're all going to have impact on the business, and thank you for spending time with me. I'm happy to meet with anybody at any time. Thrilled to be part of this event here at Trace3. So thank you.